This is a work of fiction. All characters and events depicted are invented. Rain slid down the window of the Capitol Hill coffee shop in thin, steady lines, and Ava Sullivan sat with both hands wrapped around a hot chocolate, trying to convince her ankles that the walk from the bus stop hadn't been 3 blocks, but 3 miles. The shop smelled like espresso and cinnamon, warm enough that the windows had fogged along the bottom edge, and Ava had claimed the booth farthest from the door out of habit more than preference, the same booth she'd taken every week for the past month. Her coat, oversized and unzipped at the collar, because nothing buttoned comfortably anymore, hung heavy on her shoulders, and underneath it her skin ran too warm, the way it had for weeks now, no matter the weather. She'd ordered 2 blueberry muffins along with the hot chocolate, because the hunger that had settled into her these past months wasn't the kind that responded to reason, and she'd stopped fighting it, somewhere around the 6th week of pretending a single piece of toast would be enough to get her through a morning. The bell over the door rang, and Grant Mercer walked in, shaking rain from his umbrella, spotting her before she spotted him. "Ava," he said, already looking her over in a way that made her want to disappear into the booth. "Wow, you've really let yourself go." "Hi, Grant. How much have you actually gained? You look like you stopped caring completely." A couple at the next table glanced over, then quickly away. "I have a medical condition," Ava said, keeping her voice level. "It's not really your business anymore." 2 muffins, Grant said, nodding at her plate, "isn't a medical condition. It's a lack of discipline." Something shifted low in her abdomen, sharp and sudden, and far too strong for 16 weeks, and Ava's hand flew to the table's edge as pain rolled through her. When she spoke again, her voice carried an odd resonance underneath it, low and layered, like 2 voices speaking at once. "You have no idea what I am carrying." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly at the strange pitch of it, but he laughed it off, muttered something about her being dramatic as always, and left without paying for his own coffee. He didn't look back at her twice, but he did glance at his phone once, briefly before the door swung shut behind him. Ava didn't notice that part. She only noticed that she needed to get home. Inside her apartment, she peeled off the coat and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying an abdomen that had no business looking the way it did at 16 weeks. Round and full and heavy, the skin stretched tight, veins visible beneath the surface in faint blue lines. Nothing about it matching the timeline app on her phone insisted was accurate. She turned sideways, then back again, running one hand slowly along the curve of it, cataloging every change like she was still hoping, somewhere underneath the fear, to find an explanation ordinary enough to be comforting. Something pressed hard against her palm from the inside, a small foot or hand shoving, with a strength that made her breath catch. "I know," she whispered to it. "I feel you too." 5 months earlier, she'd been coordinating a private gala at a downtown hotel, chasing down a missing centerpiece order in a service corridor when she'd nearly collided with a man in a dark coat who didn't belong back there any more than she expected him to. He'd introduced himself simply, without title, and helped her carry 2 crates of glassware down a hallway before she'd even asked, moving with an ease that seemed strange for a man dressed like he belonged upstairs among the guests rather than back here among the extension cords and folded linens. Lucien Allister spent the rest of that night finding reasons to be wherever she was working. He told her later, that she hadn't once treated him like someone important, that she'd handed him a stack of napkins and asked him to fold them instead of asking what he did for a living. 3 months followed, rooftop conversations that ran past midnight, Lucien talking about historical events with a specificity that unsettled her before she understood why, describing a coronation in Vienna or a plague summer in Florence, like memory rather than history. His hands always cold no matter the season, his refusal to meet her anywhere before sundown. She'd noticed the small things first and explained them away. The untouched food at dinner, the way mirrors in his penthouse seemed arranged more for decor than actual use. The particular stillness he fell into if a conversation ran too long, without him remembering to breathe visibly. One night, she cut her finger on a wine glass and watched his eyes go black at the edges. Watched something sharp lengthen behind his lips before he turned away, his whole body rigid with the effort of not moving toward her. He told her the truth after that, plainly, without asking her to believe anything on faith. 800 years, a bloodline, a war, most of the world would never know existed. She stayed anyway. What passed between them afterward was hers to choose, and she chose it with her eyes open, understanding exactly what she was choosing and why. The next morning, his penthouse was empty, stripped down to bare furniture, and on the counter sat a single folded note in handwriting she'd never seen before. Enemies were closer than he'd let on, and she needed to forget him completely if she wanted to be safe. No number, no address, no way to reach him at all. Ava had understood, reading it, exactly what abandonment felt like when it came wrapped in the language of protection. Lucien had disappeared 4 months earlier, days after the last night they'd spent together, which meant every impossible week since had been counted from a conception she hadn't yet known to name. A month after that, the hunger started, constant and specific, and food she used to love began tasting like nothing at all. Her body changed faster than any pregnancy she'd ever heard described, and the one clinic visit she'd risked early on had returned results so contradictory the technician asked if she'd used the machine correctly herself. Ava stopped going. She told herself she'd figure it out alone, rather than end up labeled dangerous, delusional, or impossible by people who had no framework for what was actually happening to her. And she started wearing looser clothes, longer coats, choosing shifts that kept her away from anyone who might ask too many questions. At 2 a.m, 3 weeks before the coffee shop, she'd woken to a pain sharp enough to fold her in half, the child inside her restless, in a way no amount of walking or water seemed to calm. Standing in the refrigerator light, she'd torn open a package of raw steak meant for the freezer and eaten it straight from the wrapper. Hands shaking, tears running freely, disgusted with herself, even as the movement inside her went still almost immediately, replaced by something like relief. That was how Maya Reed found her, blood on her fingers, plate empty, tears running down her face, standing barefoot on the kitchen tile at 2 a.m, like a stranger in her own home. Maya didn't scream and didn't step back. She crossed the kitchen, took one look at the fever radiating off Ava's skin, the swelling in her ankles, the impossible size of her, and said only, "Whatever you promised him, it isn't worth dying for. We're going to a doctor. Tonight." "I can't explain it," Ava said. "You'll think I'm losing my mind." "I think you're scared and hiding," Maya said. "That's different. Get your shoes." Dr. Aaron Feldman didn't comment once on Ava's size when she came in the next morning, only on her vitals, moving through his exam with the same careful attention he'd have given any patient. He asked good, specific questions. When the craving started, what foods she could no longer tolerate, whether the movement felt different from anything she'd read about, and wrote down her answers without a trace of the skepticism she'd braced herself for. Hormone levels put her at roughly 16 weeks. Her fundal height measured like she was close to full term. Fluid retention was severe enough to concern him. Tissue density strange enough that he ordered a second ultrasound himself, before saying anything at all. On the monitor, the image dissolved into static and shadow, no matter how he adjusted the probe, the fetus impossible to properly outline, though the heartbeat came through the speakers unmistakably. Slow, 40 beats a minute, each one landing with a weight that made the overhead lights flicker in time with it. Maya gripped Ava's hand through the whole thing, watching the doctor's face rather than the screen, reading his growing unease before he said a word. "I don't know what this is," Dr. Feldman admitted, quiet and honest, setting the probe down carefully. "But it's alive, and it isn't behaving like anything I've delivered before. I need help I'm not equipped to give you alone." The lights went out completely a moment later. A blue phototherapy unit stood folded against the far wall, wheeled in weeks earlier during the pediatric wing's renovation, and never returned to storage. The temperature in the room dropped hard enough that Ava's breath fogged in front of her, and Dr. Feldman, crumpled against the exam table, breathing but unconscious. A man stood where the door had been, tall and pale in a way that had nothing to do with the darkness, dressed like he'd stepped out of a century that no longer existed. "Severin Voss," he said, as though the name alone should mean something. "I followed the scent of royal blood halfway across this city. You're carrying Lucien Allister's heir, a child that could outlive his enemies, walk in daylight, end a war his bloodline has been losing for centuries." He looked at her the way a man looks at an object he's already decided how to dispose of, not with cruelty exactly, but with the flat certainty of someone convinced his cause justified whatever came next. "I don't hate you," he added almost gently. "You're simply in the way of something larger than either of us. Older than your king, older than this city, older than anything either of you will live to see the end of. That cannot be allowed to happen," he said. "The child does not get to be born." Ava moved instantly, putting her body between Severin and Maya, slamming her palm against the emergency alarm bolted to the wall, grabbing a metal instrument tray in both hands. Her voice came out, layered again, resonant, older than her own throat. "You are not touching her. You are not touching either of us." Severin lunged. Before he closed the distance, something detonated from deep inside Ava's body, a concussive pulse of pure force that threw him backward into the cabinets, cracked the observation window down its center, and blew every piece of electrical equipment in the room in a shower of sparks. The child had defended them both without being asked, though the effort had cost something. Ava felt the strength drain out of her own legs in the same instant, as if the pulse had drawn on reserves belonging to both of them at once. The pulse of energy carried further than the room, further than the building, and Lucien felt it like a hand closing around his chest from 3 miles away. He came through the shattered window less than 2 minutes later, and the fight that followed was fast and short, Ava dragging the phototherapy unit into place and driving its full beam across the room at the exact moment Severin turned, the burst of clinical blue light searing across his forearm and throat. Severin staggered back, the daylight mimicking light doing in seconds what it would take true sun far longer to finish, and fled through the broken window rather than test how much more he could survive. Lucien let him go, choosing Ava's collapsing legs over the chase. Lucien turned to her, reaching instinctively, and Ava stepped back before his hands could close around her shoulders. "You left me alone with this." "I disappeared to draw them away from you," he said. "I thought if they believed I'd cut you loose, they'd stop watching you and start watching me instead. You made sure I had no way to tell you what happened to me," Ava said. "No number, no name I could use, no warning that something like this was even possible. You didn't just leave, Lucien. You made certain I couldn't follow, couldn't warn you, couldn't ask for help. I found out I was carrying your child alone in a bathroom mirror 4 months after you disappeared. He didn't defend it. I was wrong to decide that for you," he said. "I told myself silence was mercy. It wasn't. It was me choosing what felt safest for me to live with and calling it protection. I don't expect you to forgive that because I came back in time," he went on. "I'm only telling you the truth now, plainly, the way I should have from the start, and I intend to keep telling it to you, whether or not you ever let me close again." Later, once Dr. Feldman had woken, and a second doctor named Celine Ward had arrived to examine the damage, Celine explained what Ava's body had actually been doing for 4 months, building tissue, fluid, calorie reserves, blood volume, all of it working to contain and distribute an energy no ordinary human frame was built to carry. "Your body didn't fail you," Lucien said, quiet and certain, kneeling beside where she sat so their eyes were level. "It kept both of you alive while I wasn't here to help. Every pound, every ache, every night you couldn't explain to yourself. That was your body doing exactly what it needed to do. That was never something to be ashamed of, and I won't let anyone in this house make you feel otherwise, including me." "That pulse tonight wasn't something he can simply do again whenever he wants," Celine added, checking Ava's vitals with careful hands. "It's a last defense, not a weapon. It very nearly emptied both of you. And I suspect it's what's about to push this pregnancy toward its end faster than any of us were prepared for. Celine's phone lit up on the counter with an incoming file. Raphael's counterpart had pulled from Severin's own device, a thread of messages stretching back weeks. Grant's name attached to every one of them. Grant had confirmed Ava's condition after the coffee shop. Grant had reported the clinic's address the morning of the attack, timed almost exactly to when Ava had arrived. Grant had known, reading those messages, exactly what Severin intended to do once he found her, and had asked, in return, only for a partnership recommendation and a number large enough to make the silence worth his while. One message, sent less than an hour before the lights went out in the exam room, read simply, "She's inside now, alone except for a friend and a doctor." Ava read it twice, feeling less shock than a slow, cold confirmation of something she'd already half suspected the moment Grant had glanced at his phone in the coffee shop. He wasn't there for coffee, she said. He was confirming a target. Lucien's hands curled into fists, and for a moment, something ancient and furious moved behind his eyes, the composed formality slipping just enough for Ava to see exactly what he was capable of if she let him. "I want the evidence preserved," Ava said, before he could offer anything else. "Not revenge. Evidence. I want him to lose everything he tried to buy with what he did to me, through the same system that would judge anyone else who did this. He nearly got you killed," Lucien said. "Then let the law say so," Ava answered. "Not you. Not quietly. I want his name in a courtroom, not a headstone." Lucien agreed and meant it. The clinic wasn't safe anymore, and Lucien offered his estate outside the city, but Ava set her own terms before agreeing to anything. Maya came with her. Dr. Feldman stayed protected. Every medical decision would be explained to her fully. No one would call her queen without her say. Lucien would never vanish again without telling her why first, and she kept the right to leave whenever she judged it safe to. He agreed to every condition without negotiating a single one, and had the terms written down formally the same afternoon, as though he understood that a promise spoken aloud wasn't the same as one she could hold in her hands. Dr. Feldman remained under protection throughout, consulting with Celine by phone as Ava's recovery progressed. His memory and his medical license left exactly as they were. Proof, Ava thought, that Lucien's promises about consent extended past the people he loved. At the estate, Celine and an ancient midwife named Mara examined Ava together. Honest about the limits of their own experience, with something neither of them had witnessed before. "I've delivered hybrids before," Mara said, laying out instruments with steady hands, "never one carrying this much royal weight. I won't pretend I know exactly what tonight will look like. I know what to watch for, and I know when to stop and change course if something goes wrong." "Hybrid gestation runs 4 to 5 months, not 9, Mara continued. "He's nearly ready. The attack likely triggered labor early, and her body won't be able to safely hold this much longer." Labor came on hard and fast that same night, Maya gripping one of Ava's hands through every contraction. Lucien pale and silent on her other side, the estate's lights dimming and flaring with each surge of the child's slow, powerful heartbeat. Hours in, exhausted and shaking, Ava felt something in her give way that had nothing to do with progress. "I can't," Ava gasped, somewhere near the worst of it. "I can't do this." "Then don't, for him," Lucien said, gripping her hand tighter, his voice breaking in a way she'd never heard from him before. "Do it for yourself. Your life matters more to me than any bloodline, more than any heir, more than anything this family has ever built. Stay with me. That's all I need from you tonight." Mara's voice cut through, calm and firm. "She's close. Ava, I need one more push, and I need you to trust your own body one more time. It has kept you both alive this far." Ava pushed, screamed, and felt the pressure finally break loose all at once. She delivered a son close to dawn, dark-haired, pale-skinned, eyes so black they seemed to hold no bottom at all. His first cry, sending every light in the room flickering once before steadying. When they laid him against her chest, the pressure that had lived under Ava's skin for 4 months finally eased, her fever breaking within the hour, exhaustion settling over her like something almost peaceful. Near dawn, a thin line of sunrise found its way through the estate's heavy curtains and crossed the baby's cheek where Mara had carried him to the window. Lucien moved fast, instinct pulling him forward to shield the child, but Mara caught his arm and held it still. The baby blinked into the light, unbothered, and didn't burn. Severin was right about that much, at least, Mara said quietly. She and Lucien named him together. Elias Sullivan Allister, her name kept beside his, on purpose, the same way she'd kept everything else that was hers. Grant's arrest came 3 weeks later, built entirely from records he'd generated himself, surveillance logs, banking transfers from shell companies tied to Severin's faction, time-stamped messages that left no room for interpretation. Prosecutors never had to explain what Severin actually was. They only had to prove Grant had knowingly sold a woman's location to a man he understood intended to harm her. Stalking, conspiracy, bribery, facilitating attempted murder. Charges that stood on their own, without a single word about vampires. His law license was suspended before the firm finished distancing itself from him publicly. The partnership he'd sold everything for, gone, along with the frozen funds. A press release from the firm within days, making clear he'd acted entirely outside their knowledge or authorization. Ava agreed to testify when the time came, sitting through a deposition that required her to describe, in careful legal language, exactly what Grant's information had made possible. Lucien, true to his word, never touched him. He didn't need to. The paper trail did what neither of them required violence to accomplish, and Grant, awaiting trial in an apartment far smaller than the one he'd been planning to buy with his partnership bonus, finally understood that the woman he'd dismissed over blueberry muffins had been holding, this entire time, more power over his future than he'd ever held over hers. Severin was never caught, but the burns Ava's light had left him with told a story his own faction couldn't ignore. A rebellion built on the promise of ending Lucien's line had watched its leader flee a human medical clinic from a woman with nothing but a lamp and a healthy dose of fury, and within weeks the faction had scattered into smaller, quieter pieces than it had ever been. Recovery took months, not days. The swelling receded slowly, her fever fully gone within weeks, her joints easing bit by bit, her appetite finally settling into something ordinary again. She kept stretch marks she'd never asked for, and a tiredness that came and went without warning. And some mornings, looking in the mirror, she still had to remind herself that what her body had survived wasn't something to hide, but something to understand. She stopped waiting to feel whole again, because she already did. Maya stayed close through all of it, dropping by the estate on her days off from the emergency clinic, refusing every offer of a permanent room there, because, as she put it, someone needed to keep at least 1 foot in the real world. She and Ava still met for coffee every other week. No bodyguards, no titles, just 2 friends catching up the way they always had. When Lucien's counsel pushed to crown her immediately, Ava refused outright. "Giving birth doesn't qualify me to govern anything," she told them, standing in a room full of men and women several centuries older than her. "If I want authority here, I'll earn it the same way anyone should, by learning the law, sitting through the meetings, understanding the houses I'd be answerable to before I ask any of them to answer to me." Lucien backed her without hesitation, and she became council observer and consort on her own terms. Nothing automatic, nothing assumed. Over those 6 months, she sat through blood law hearings she barely understood at first, challenged 2 security decrees she thought treated human partners like liabilities rather than people, and helped draft the first formal protections the council had ever put in writing for exactly that group. One afternoon, when Ava mentioned she wanted to walk to the coffee shop alone, Lucien didn't simply agree or simply insist on his usual 6-man detail. He asked what she'd actually be comfortable with, then handed her a short list of names and let her choose which 2, if any, would trail a block behind. He rebuilt trust the same way, slowly, sharing every threat instead of shielding her from it, asking before deciding anything that touched her life, never once raising the estate's gates as a cage disguised as safety. 6 months later, Ava walked back into the same Capitol Hill coffee shop without the oversized coat, ordering one muffin and one hot chocolate instead of the two she used to need just to make it through an afternoon. The bell above the door rang the same way it always had, and for a moment she half expected to feel the old instinct to shrink down into her seat. It didn't come. Lucienne found her at the same table, glancing at the single muffin with the faintest trace of a smile. "Only one today?" "One's enough today," Ava said. "The other two were never the problem, Lucien." The judgment was. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant, and asked whether she was ready to accept a formal seat on the council. "Is that offer only because I gave you a son?" "No," he said, without hesitation. "It's because you survived Severin, exposed Grant, protected Maya, demanded evidence instead of revenge, and turned down a crown you hadn't earned yet. That is the record on which the council is offering you a seat, Ava. Elias is only the reason we met in a room full of people who needed to hear the rest of it." She thought about it for a long moment, watching the rain streak down the same window it had 6 months earlier, and agreed, on terms she'd write herself. Grant had looked at Ava's changing body in a coffee shop and believed he understood the whole of her. Weight as laziness, hunger as weakness, a woman he'd already discarded as beneath his notice. He never once saw the impossible life she was protecting, or the strength it took to survive being left with no explanation at all. Lucien had made his own mistake, deciding for her instead of with her, certain that silence could pass for protection. He learned, eventually, that love without truth and shared choice isn't protection. It's just another kind of abandonment, dressed up to look like care. Ava was never made worthy by Lucien's return, and she wasn't made powerful by giving birth to his son. She was already worthy in that coffee shop, long before anyone understood what she carried. Her body changed, her life changed, her title changed, her worth never did. Would you forgive Lucien after he disappeared without giving Ava any way to reach him? Or did he only earn the chance to prove he'd changed? Let us know what you think in the comments below.